Before he ever took a snap in an NFL game, before he read a defense under stadium lights or felt a pass rush collapse a pocket, Shedeur Sanders had already done something that made league executives pause mid-sentence. Not coaches, not fans, executives, the people who live inside spreadsheets, salary caps, and licensing agreements. According to industry chatter, the number attached to his name wasn't coming from a rookie deal, incentives, or a future bonus clause. It was coming from something far more unsettling to the system: control. What stunned people wasn't just the reported money, it was the timing. Rookies are supposed to arrive empty-handed, grateful, moldable. They're expected to earn later, after proving themselves, after years inside the machine. But Sanders didn't arrive asking for opportunity. He arrived with leverage, and that flipped the entire script in a league built on the idea that leverage flows one way. Here's the part that quietly rattled front offices. Nothing dramatic happened. No public standoff, no angry press conferences, no leaked emails or agent theatrics. On paper, it looked like just another signing, another rookie onboarding, another routine process. But buried inside that paperwork was something teams aren't used to seeing attached to someone who hasn't played it down yet: ownership energy. The kind that suggests the player isn't just entering the league, but negotiating with it. That's where the discomfort starts, because the NFL is designed around a simple belief: the league makes you valuable. The exposure, the platform, the revenue streams, they all flow through the shield first. Players benefit, of course, but they don't dictate. At least, they weren't supposed to. Sanders showed up already marketable, already profitable, already followed. The league didn't build his audience, he brought it with him. And once that reality hits the negotiating table, everything changes. What makes this moment dangerous isn't that it was loud, it's that it was quiet. No viral clip announced it, no headline fully explained it. By the time most people noticed something was different, the deal was already done, the money was already moving, and the league was already reacting behind closed doors. That's when whispers started spreading through agent circles and ownership meetings, not about talent, about precedent. Because if a rookie can walk in with this kind of autonomy, if brand power can exist outside the league's control, then the balance everyone accepted for decades suddenly looks fragile. Sanders didn't challenge the system by fighting it, he challenged it by bypassing parts of it. And once a system is bypassed successfully, it's never the same again. This isn't just a story about a quarterback, it's not even really a story about football yet. It's about timing, leverage, and a league realizing a little too late that control only works when everyone agrees to give it to you. And Shedeur Sanders may have just proven that agreement is starting to crack. The moment the numbers started circulating, the conversations changed tone. Not louder, quieter. That's usually how you can tell something hit a nerve. According to reports floating through agent circles and front office backchannels, Shedeur Sanders had already generated north of 8 figures before touching an NFL field. No bonus escalators, no future incentives, just money already realized. And that alone made seasoned executives stop mid-thought. In a league where rookie deals are tightly controlled and carefully slotted, that kind of figure isn't supposed to exist, at least not yet. The system is designed so first contracts are predictable, capped, and orderly. Everyone knows what a rookie is worth, or at least they thought they did. This number didn't fit the model. It didn't come from the usual pipelines, and that's what made it unsettling. What really threw people wasn't the size of the figure, it was the source. This wasn't league-distributed revenue. It wasn't filtered through team structures or shared pools. Reports suggested it was coming from a personal ecosystem Sanders already owned. His likeness, his audience, his commercial gravity. Money generated because people followed him, not because the league told them to. That distinction matters more than any dollar sign. Executives are trained to think in terms of control and precedent. One player making money is normal. A rookie creating value outside the league's revenue-sharing structure is not. Because once that door's open, the usual sequence collapses. Performance no longer has to come first. Popularity doesn't need league permission. In the league's quiet leverage, the ability to delay, deny, or dilute individual earning power starts losing its edge. There's another layer that made this uncomfortable. That money wasn't theoretical, it wasn't potential, it was already banked, already validated by fans, sponsors, and engagement metrics, which means it couldn't be dismissed as hyped. You can argue projections, you can debate upside, you can't argue cash that's already moved. That's when the room goes quiet. Because if a rookie can walk in having already unlocked that level of value, the usual language stops working. You can't sell patience to someone who isn't waiting. You can't promise exposure to someone who already has it. And you can't frame opportunity as a favor when the player knows exactly what they bring to the table. This was the moment some executives reportedly realized this wasn't about talent evaluation anymore. It was about power evaluation, about whether the league was still the primary source of value or just one participant in a much larger ecosystem. And once that question enters the room, the negotiation is never the same again. The part most people missed is that none of this started on draft night or inside an NFL office. The groundwork was laid much earlier, far from pro contracts and salary slotting. Back when Shedeur Sanders was playing college football at Colorado, what looked like a typical program turnaround was quietly becoming something else entirely. It wasn't just about wins, losses, or rankings. It was about infrastructure. Colorado became a test lab, not officially, not announced, but in practice. Behind the scenes, Sanders was building something most college quarterbacks never bothered to think about: direct access, consistent content, a personal narrative that didn't depend on highlight shows or post-game interviews. He wasn't waiting for networks to tell his story, he was telling it himself, day by day, clip by clip. That's why the audience followed him so closely. Sands didn't just see him on Saturdays, they saw the work, the routine, the mindset, training sessions, travel moments, locker room energy. It created familiarity, and familiarity turns into loyalty fast. People weren't just rooting for a jersey, they were attached to a person. And that's a critical difference that the league model often underestimates. At the time, a lot of traditional football minds brushed it off. Too much noise, too much social media, too much focus off the field. But that missed the point entirely. This wasn't a distraction, it was construction. While others were focused solely on depth charts and game tape, Sanders was building an audience that would move with him wherever he went. Team change proof, league change proof. What made the blueprint powerful is that it didn't rely on permission. He didn't need a conference deal, a TV spot, or a marketing push from a school. He used platforms that already existed and spoke directly to the people paying attention. That direct-to-fan relationship created something the league can't manufacture on demand: trust. And once trust is there, monetization isn't forced, it's natural. By the time his college run ended, he wasn't just known, he was established. There was already data showing engagement, already merchandise moving, already sponsors interested without needing the NFL badge attached. That's what changed everything when draft conversations started. He wasn't pitching potential, he was showing proof. This is why the Colorado phase matters so much. It wasn't a detour, it was the foundation. And when people talk about leverage later, this is where it was created, quietly, intentionally, while most of the industry wasn't paying attention. That's where the whispers start, not in press releases, not on broadcast panels, in hallways, in agent calls, in rooms where contracts are dissected line by line. People aren't openly naming it, but they're circling the same idea, a clause that doesn't behave like a normal rookie provision, something insiders have started referring to, almost casually, as a prime equity structure. And the reason it's being talked about in hushed tones is simple: it's not supposed to exist at this stage of a career. According to reports and industry speculation, the clause tied to Shedeur Sanders wasn't about salary at all. It wasn't about guarantees or incentives. It was about ownership, control over name, image, likeness, and the downstream revenue connected to them. the kind of control that usually only comes after years of leverage, Pro Bowls, or MVP-level production. Seeing it connected to a rookie contract is what made people lean in. What's important here is how it's being described, not the legal jargon itself. This wasn't a symbolic allowance or a marketing favor. The way it's been framed suggests an actual participation stake in the commercial machine built around the player. Merchandise, content, brand partnerships, revenue streams that typically flow upward through teams in the league first. This time, at least in part, they reportedly didn't. That's why executives didn't immediately push back publicly, because on its face, nothing looked illegal, nothing violated the collective structure outright, it simply shifted where certain value landed. And that's far more dangerous than a direct confrontation. You can fight demands, you can shut down protests, but a clean contract, signed and filed, is much harder to undo. For decades, rookie deals have followed a predictable pattern. Salary slots are fixed, rights are bundled, branding is centralized, players perform first, earn later. This clause turns that order upside down. It treats brand value as something already proven, already bankable, rather than something the league develops. That single assumption changes the entire negotiation landscape. And here's the part that really unsettles people. If this structure holds, there's nothing inherently unique about it. No loophole exclusive to one name, no rule that says only one player can ask for it. The clause isn't radical in spirit, it's radical in timing. It introduces a level of autonomy before the system is used to granting it. That's why the term keeps coming up quietly, not because teams want to advertise it, but because they're trying to understand it. How it got approved, why it didn't trigger alarms sooner, and most importantly, what happens when the next high-profile prospect walks in and asks the same question, not about salary, but about ownership. Because once that question is asked out loud, it can't be unheard. To understand why this rattled so many people, you have to understand how the system was designed in the first place. The National Football League was never built to handle players who arrive fully formed as businesses. It was built for development, containment, and scale. Centralize the brand, control the visuals, own the distribution, then plug players into that structure and let the machine amplify them on its own terms. That model works when players need the league more than the league needs them. For decades, that was the unspoken agreement. You want visibility? The NFL provides it. You want legitimacy? The Shield delivers it. In exchange, the league controls the lanes where money flows. Jerseys, highlights, commercials, licensing, all of it routes upward first, then trickles back down through salaries and negotiated deals. The power stays centralized because the system depends on it. But this structure quietly assumes something that isn't true anymore. It assumes players arrive as blanks, that their value only begins once the league turns the lights on. Social media shattered that assumption. Direct-to-fan platforms finished the job. Today, an athlete can build an audience larger than some franchises before ever signing a pro contract, and the league, by design, has no clean way to absorb that kind of independence. The NFL's controls are rigid because they have to be. Shared revenue, uniform branding standards, tightly protected media rights. These aren't accidents. They exist to prevent fragmentation. Once players start owning pieces of the ecosystem individually, the math gets messy. Revenue streams splinter, control dilutes, and the league's biggest advantage, its ability to package and sell everything as one unified product, starts to weaken. This is why a clause that shifts even a small percentage of control feels so disruptive. It exposes the limits of the model. The system can handle stars, it struggles with partners. The moment a player isn't just performing but participating, not just earning but owning, the old playbook stops applying cleanly. You can't manage that with fines, policies, or tradition. And that's the real tension underneath all of this. The NFL doesn't just sell football games, it sells certainty, predictable negotiations, predictable contracts, predictable hierarchy. A player arriving with leverage before kickoff threatens that predictability, not because it breaks rules, but because it renders some of them obsolete. The NFL wasn't built for athletes who don't need to be introduced. It wasn't built for rookies who arrive with audiences, revenue, and proof of concept already in hand. And the league, by design, has no clean way to absorb that kind of independence. The NFL's controls are rigid because they have to be. Shared revenue, uniform branding standards, tightly protected media rights. These aren't accidents. They exist to prevent fragmentation. Once players start owning pieces of the ecosystem individually, the math gets messy. Revenue streams splinter, control dilutes, and the league's biggest advantage, its ability to package and sell everything as one unified product, starts to weaken. This is why a clause that shifts even a small percentage of control feels so disruptive. It exposes the limits of the model. The system can handle stars, it struggles with partners. The moment a player isn't just performing but participating, not just earning but owning, the old playbook stops applying cleanly. You can't manage that with fines, policies, or tradition. And that's the real tension underneath all of this. The NFL doesn't just sell football games, it sells certainty, predictable negotiations, predictable contracts, predictable hierarchy. A player arriving with leverage before kickoff threatens that predictability, not because it breaks rules, but because it renders some of them obsolete. The NFL wasn't built for athletes who don't need to be introduced. It wasn't built for rookies who arrive with audiences, revenue, and proof of concept already in hand. And the league, by design, has no clean way to absorb that kind of independence. The NFL's controls are rigid because they have to be. Shared revenue, uniform branding standards, tightly protected media rights. These aren't accidents. They exist to prevent fragmentation. Once players start owning pieces of the ecosystem individually, the math gets messy. Revenue streams splinter, control dilutes, and the league's biggest advantage, its ability to package and sell everything as one unified product, starts to weaken.
The Browns had reasons, some obvious, some strategic. They're a franchise that has lived with instability at quarterback. That history creates urgency. Urgency changes risk tolerance. When a player shows up with not just talent, but attention, audience, and relevance, that matters in a market trying to stabilize its identity. Sanders didn't just represent upside on the field, he represented engagement off it, visibility and relevance that doesn't wait for a winning record. There's also the business calculation. A player with a built-in fan base doesn't just sell jerseys, he brings eyeballs, clicks, and sponsors that weren't previously in your orbit. From a purely economic standpoint, that can offset perceived concessions in a contract. If a team believes the overall pie gets bigger, giving up a slice feels less painful, especially if that slice helps pull the entire organization into a new revenue conversation. But here's why most teams wouldn't do it. This kind of agreement challenges internal power dynamics. It forces front offices to acknowledge that value doesn't start and end with the franchise. That's a hard pill to swallow in a league where control is currency. Owners worry about precedent. Once you grant one player a degree of autonomy, every negotiation after that becomes harder. Suddenly, standard contracts aren't so standard anymore. There's also fear of imbalance. Teams worry about locker room optics. If one rookie comes in with branding authority and ownership leverage, what does that signal to veterans who never had that opportunity? Managing egos is already complicated. Managing awareness of missed opportunity is worse. That's why many franchises would rather avoid the situation entirely than explain it internally. So the Browns' decision stands out, not because it's reckless, but because it's revealing. It suggests either a willingness to gamble on the future or an acknowledgement that the old rules don't apply to every player anymore. Possibly both. And once one team shows it can work on paper, others are forced to confront a reality they've avoided for a long time. Because even teams that said no this time know what's coming. The next conversation won't start from zero. It will start with a name, with a deal, and with a simple question they won't be able to ignore. Why not us? What makes this moment so unsettling for the league is how little friction it created on the surface. No grievances were filed, no public disputes erupted, no statements were leaked to the press. There were no angry sound bites for talk shows to chew on. From the outside, everything looked calm, normal even, and that's precisely why it worked. Historically, shifts in power come with noise, holdouts, threats, legal battles, public pressure campaigns that force institutions to respond defensively. This wasn't that. According to those familiar with how the deal came together, there was no confrontation to point to, no rule bent in public view. The process stayed clean, the language stayed legal. The paperwork was filed the same way every other contract is filed. That's what makes it dangerous to the old system. By the time anyone realized what had happened, it was already in place. Nothing to overturn, nothing to discipline, no narrative to spin. This wasn't rebellion, this was preparation, the kind that happens months, sometimes years before negotiations ever begin. When leverage is built quietly, you don't need to announce it, you just use it. That silence matters, because institutions know how to fight enemies. They struggle with participants who follow the rules but still change outcomes. You can't punish someone for asking a question and getting a yes. You can't claim chaos when everything is technically compliant, and you definitely can't roll back a signed agreement without admitting the system allowed it.
This is also why this move doesn't feel like a one-off. Loud disruptions tend to get contained, quiet ones get copied. Other agents are already studying the structure, not to mimic it perfectly, but to understand the logic behind it. What was framed as acceptable? Where was flexibility found? What assumptions were challenged without triggering resistance? That's the part league offices don't love to talk about, because once this approach is understood, it becomes repeatable. You don't need protests or public pressure. You need leverage, timing, and a team willing to listen. The absence of drama isn't a sign of weakness, it's proof of strategy. And now that the blueprint exists, the noise comes later, not in courtrooms or press conferences, but in negotiation rooms across the league, where the next generation of players quietly asks for more than just a salary and waits to see who says yes. The real impact didn't show up in headlines, it showed up in behavior. Quiet changes, subtle shifts, conversations that hadn't been happening before suddenly happening everywhere. Agent phones started ringing more than usual, not with panic, but with curiosity. Players weren't asking about bonus structure anymore. They were asking about ownership, about control, about why their name keeps making everyone else money. Veterans were the first to feel it. Guys who had spent years doing appearances, wearing branded gear, watching their highlights circulate endlessly online, all without seeing a direct return beyond their salary. For a long time, that was just how it worked. Then they saw a rookie arrive already paid, already positioned, already protected. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. Contracts that were once glanced over started getting reread line by line. Rookies and draft hopefuls picked it up even faster. For the first time, branding became part of pre-draft prep, not as a vanity play, but as a leverage insurance. Social presence wasn't just about followers anymore, it was about proof. Proof that value exists before the league gets involved. Proof that attention can be converted. Proof that fans will move with the player, not the logo. That changes how negotiations start. Front offices felt it too, even if they didn't say it out loud. Teams that had always leaned on standard language realized standard only works when everyone accepts it. Once exceptions exist, the word loses weight. Scouts started hearing agents mention audience size alongside arm strength. Marketing departments suddenly had a seat closer to the table. That alone tells you how much the ground is shifting. And it didn't stop at football. Other leagues noticed immediately. Different sports, same pattern. Athletes asking why control over their own image isn't automatic, why highlights are locked behind corporate permission, why revenue has to flow one direction. Once a precedent exists anywhere, it creates pressure everywhere. Gatekeepers across sports felt that tension almost overnight. The most telling part is that none of this required coordination. No union mandate, no collective push. It spread naturally because it makes sense. When one person demonstrates a better route, others start looking for the same map. That's how real shifts happen, not through speeches or movements, but through example. This is why the ripple can't be stopped. It doesn't rely on approval, it feeds on awareness. Every negotiation from here forward carries a new undercurrent, even if it's never spoken aloud.
Players now know there's another way to enter the room, and once knowledge spreads, control never fully resets.
None of this exists in a vacuum, and that's the part longtime league watchers immediately picked up on. There's a lineage here, a philosophy that didn't suddenly materialize during contract talks, but was shaped years earlier by someone who lived through the system from the inside and came out with scars to prove it. Shedeur Sanders has been talking about this imbalance for decades, long before NIL became a buzzword and long before players were encouraged to think like owners. Shedur's career played out in an era where athletes were everywhere but owned almost nothing. His name sold tickets, his image moved merchandise, his highlights filled broadcasts, yet the structures around him made sure the real money lived elsewhere. He has spoken openly about watching leagues profit endlessly off player identities, while those players were told to be grateful for exposure. That perspective didn't come from theory, it came from experience. That's the blueprint people are finally connecting now. Shedeur didn't stumble into this understanding, he was raised in it. The idea that talent without ownership is incomplete, that fame without control is a temporary loan. While others were being taught to keep their heads down and earn later, he was being taught to see the business behind the game in real time. That changes how you approach everything, especially negotiations. What makes this connection important isn't legacy optics, it's preparation. When the moment arrived, nothing about this move looked rushed or reactionary, because it wasn't. The foundation was already there, the language was familiar, the priorities were clear. This wasn't about trying to outsmart the league, it was about refusing to repeat an old mistake. That generational awareness is what turns a good idea into a durable one. Because it's not driven by ego, it's driven by memory. Memory of how the system treated players when they didn't ask questions. Memory of how quickly value disappeared once careers ended. This clause, this approach, is a response to that history. And that's why this feels larger than one contract. It's not just a rookie thinking differently, it's a handoff, knowledge passed down at the exact moment the industry is vulnerable to it. The league may see an individual deal, others see a roadmap that's been waiting for the right time, and that time clearly is now. What just happened didn't arrive with fireworks or a breaking news banner, but make no mistake, it was seismic. The National Football League didn't lose control overnight, it quietly shared it. And that distinction is exactly why this moment matters more than most people realize. This wasn't rebellion, nobody stormed offices or challenged authority on a microphone. There was no spectacle. Instead, there was a signature, a clause, and an outcome that forced everyone to recalibrate. The league followed its own rules, processed a deal like it always does, and only afterward realized the balance had shifted. That's the kind of change that sticks, because you can't undo it without admitting the system allowed it. For decades, the NFL operated on a simple assumption. Players arrive to be shaped, not to negotiate structure. Exposure comes first, leverage comes later. This moment flipped that order, quietly but decisively. It showed that leverage can be built before the league enters the picture, and once it exists, it can't be ignored, not without consequences. The most important takeaway isn't the money or the clause itself, it's the awareness it created. Players now know there are different ways to walk into the league. Teams now know they may have to listen, and the league now knows that control only works when it goes unchallenged. That doesn't mean chaos is coming, it means evolution is unavoidable. This is how systems change in the modern era, not through public conflict, but through precedent. One deal becomes a reference point, one quiet decision becomes a starting line, and suddenly what once felt unthinkable starts feeling inevitable. The question now isn't whether this shift will continue, it's how quickly everyone else adapts, because once power moves, even a little, it never fully moves back.